welcome to another Tecsys in Conversation. I'm Maria Merchant, and I'm the Product Marketing Manager for Distribution at Tecsys. Today, we'll be speaking with Nick Lovatsis, Manager Partner at Avalon CSC, to discuss warehouse automation and technologies. Supply chains are regularly battling industry disruptions, but by participating in the latest market trends and technologies, they can remain competitive and achieve efficient warehouse operations. In this conversation, we'll examine how automation can be a game changer for distributors and 3PLs, the barriers to automating a warehouse, and how to calculate ROI post implementing automation in warehouse processes. Thanks for joining me today, Nick. Before we dive into our conversation, can you please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about Avalon?
My name is Nick Lovatsis. I'm a managing partner at Avalon CSC. We are a supply chain company that specializes in supply chain strategy, planning, and execution. My primary role within Avalon, outside of being a co-founder, I help lead the strategic initiative pillar with the purpose of assisting companies in making automation decisions, network optimization, and ensuring that we bring in the right partners into their ecosystem to provide better efficiencies in their supply chains.
What warehousing trends are you seeing in the distribution and 3PL industry today, and what do the next 5 years look like?
So distribution and 3PL, sometimes they go hand in hand. A distributor requires, as their business is growing, a 3PL type of services to provide some enablement and some relief in their network. Now, supply chains have gone through drastic changes. We started seeing those changes before COVID with tariffs and duties implemented by governments around the world. So we're seeing more the concept of nearshoring, or bringing back manufacturing locally. And obviously with COVID, that accelerated and affected a lot of the changes a lot faster than anybody has imagined. What some of the trends that we're seeing, obviously in the last 2.5 years, and more specifically today, obviously there's a lack of labor. It's very competitive. Amazon as being a clear-cut effect. Lack of inventory. So how to counter that? A lot of our customers are buying more, keeping more inventory in hand. However, the spillover effect is inventory has a physical constraint in terms of space. It does take up space. However, by buying more, we have to take that into account, and that's where we see a lot of those trends coming up over the next 5 to 7 years. So a distributor will count a lot on 3PL distributions, and 3PL distributors will count a lot more on end consumer or B2B to fulfill, or what we call available to promise. So from that perspective, available to promise, we're also looking at last mile delivery type of automation. And that affects everything at the ground level, from the people, the process, the technology, and the physical layout of the building.
Are any of these trends more common in a particular industry within distribution?
Yeah. So when we look at distribution, we look at it almost the same way as Tecsys does. You guys have healthcare, complex distribution. Our primary expertise and focus is around complex distribution. And when we talk about complex distribution, for us, it's energy and mining, it's transport, it's electrical, HVAC, and plumbing, and obviously retail. And so we say, why energy, mining, transport? Well, they all have warehouses. For parts, example. So parts to be utilized for maintenance purposes, you need a warehouse. So, and usually parts have to be in just in time, that a manufacturing production line or a gas line cannot go down. It's got to be up and running instantly because it affects essential services. Where we see it in more B2B type of distributions, it is the same complexities. Customers are more demanding. Amazon puts a lot of pressure on them. We're seeing a lot of infrastructure projects being spun off from all levels of government, whether they're in Canada or in the US, at the local level, at the state level, and also at the federal level. So that being said, everybody's competing for those projects and everybody has a tie-in. So I always use the analogy that if you're building an airport, the three primary things that you need in the building is electrical, plumbing, and HVAC. And odds are it's going to come from certain players that control the market in terms of products. So the primary variance is you have distributors and you also have the manufacturers of those products. So the manufacturers of those products resell it down to the distribution level, and now they've gotten a little smarter that they say, hey, you know what, we could go straight to the source and go after the contract ourselves. So we're seeing also those complexities being added into the industry over the next couple of years.
When we talk about technology, what should distributors and 3PLs keep in mind when investing in technology to run their warehouse operations?
Yeah, so what's important to note is if we take electrical distributors, just because one does it a certain way does not necessarily mean because they operate in the same industry vertical that the same formula or the same recipe could be applied to them. Everyone has a certain uniqueness to their business model. Is we have to determine what is that uniqueness to take that into consideration when we're making the proper investments into technology. Now, technology has to be supported. Do we have the right processes to support technology? Do we have the right people to support? And do we have the right communication or change enablement agents to support those investments moving forward?
So the big one, automation, right? This is what we're hearing everywhere. So what's your take on automation and how do you think this will be a game changer in the distribution industry?
My take on automation is a necessary aspect in a business if you to invest. If a distributor wants to be at the forefront of their region or be a market leader, they need to invest. Now, there's multiple types or levels of automation. It all depends on what is the business model, what is the growth projections, and what do they have in mind over the next 5 to 7 years. So we always advocate to our customers is we shouldn't invest for the next 10 years. We should be looking what is the investment that we need to make to support the business over the next 3 to 5 years. And from there, we're able to decide what is the best level and investment required for automation. Because there's going to be a lot of constraints that come with it and a lot of change that needs to be taken into account, that the way we were doing business cannot be necessarily applied when you're investing hundreds of thousands, if not millions, into an automated facility.
I mean, it's almost a shift of your mindset.
Correct, and that shift of the mindset has to start with the executives, and they are going to be considered the change enablement, change agents within their business, because they have to convince a warehouse worker, why do I have to do it that way versus the way I've been doing it for the last 25 years.
Yeah. And just on that same topic, so if we were to flip it the other way around, what do you see as the biggest barrier to automating your warehouse, and how can distributors overcome it? Now, you touched a bit upon that, but let's talk a bit more about barriers.
Yeah, so some of the main barriers that we see primarily into the distribution or even 3PL business is what we call volumetric data. The volumetric data provides a DNA of a specific product that a company sells or a SKU. And I'll take this AirPod case for an example. The cerebral case has a length, a depth, a weight, a height, and certain characteristics, including a picture. The majority of companies, unfortunately, don't have access to that kind of level of detail of data to properly decide what are the type of product files or product SKUs that should be going into automation. So that's one. They anticipate that the manufacturers that they buy it from would provide them that data. The problem is they don't. They usually provide it at the pallet or at the box level. We have to break it down to even a couple of more levels down, that we break down the box, and then in the boxes there's other boxes, and then we got to break down the box and all the way get to the what we call the unit of a measure, which is an each. From there, we have to determine the demand aspect of it. So out of that particular product profile or product SKU, how often does it get sold? Is it a slow mover or a fast mover? Is it a value-added product to have because we appease a certain customer that is big, because they'll order it once a year and we don't want them going anywhere else, and that's the value-added service that we provide? All of that gets taken into account in terms of what is the right product mix that goes into automation. That being said, then we have to determine what are the processes to ensure that whatever automation we select, with how we're going to support that business, and what is the level of automation that we want to support. Some of the challenges in distribution is some distributors have branches attached to their distribution center. So a branch is considered a storefront. So a will call order that comes in, it's not every you have to service that customer pretty much right away. So not all automation can service that customer right away. So you basically need to almost prioritize that order to say, I have somebody waiting for it. I only have 2 minutes to turn it around, and that customer has to be out the door and get to a site or to one of their customers and fulfill a job order. So all of that we look at from A to Z and basically see what is the end-to-end process from in supporting a revamp operation.
So it sounds like, the barriers would really be is the lack of understanding of your own operations, or the lack of calculation of your own operations.
Correct. So there's that. However, the biggest challenge that it's more of a lack of time. So our job as senior supply chain consultants at Avalon, the first thing that we do is educate. Let's teach them what it might be, not necessarily guide them to a solution, just help them open their eyes to the possibilities and take it into small steps. And then we start breaking it down to a much micro level to say, okay, let's start looking at your standard operating procedures and then see what we need to do to revamp.
So staying on the automation topic, how should distributors and 3PLs assess their ROI after automating their warehouse operations? Is there a formula?
There isn't a formula to say it's a calculation that applies to all. What it is, it's an approach or a methodology that provides guidance and a framework to make decisions. We have developed certain guidance and tools in the past 14 years. They always get continually refined because of different initiatives or different technologies that come up to play, whether it's from Toyota or Siemens or some of the larger automation manufacturers in the world. We have to learn from it, adapt to it. However, we always say is let's start off in baby steps, take it into prior to making much larger investments. Let's justify that this is the type of investment we want to make, and this is the ROI that we want to gain behind it, so we could put some benchmarks behind those decisions to say once we go live after 6 months, 12 months, and 18 months or so forth, that this is the anticipated ROI has been met versus actuals. Now, we also need to keep in mind that automation is one piece. Automation will most likely talk to a packing station or a sortation system. It could talk to a shipping module. It could talk to a WMS. And the WMS will need to talk to the ERP. So the base of the data has to come from somewhere, and it has to be flowed through all to the warehouse controller system that we get applied.
Lastly, what is one piece of advice you can give a large to mid-market distributor or 3PL who wants to improve their warehouse supply chain operations leveraging technology?
So the first advice is education. Educate yourself. Don't rush it. It is a discipline to support an automated warehouse. The discipline needs to be there. How to create that discipline, you need to educate yourself and figure out what others have done. There's a lot of case studies out there. We found in the industry verticals that we operate in, everybody is very helpful. They do open up their doors without necessarily giving their competitive secrets, but they do share some of their pain points on how they overcame it, because usually the pain points are very similar one to another. That's the first step. The second step is, if you don't assess your staff immediately to determine the level of expertise that is in-house. If it's not in-house, then determine, do we bring in a third-party consulting firm that has done that with good references to assist. And what we mean by assist, not necessarily to impose a decision, it is to guide you into making a proper decision with proper options on the table. There's always going to be option A, B, C, D, and E. To ensure that a customer makes the right decision, they need to be given those options to advocate what are the risks, what are the pros and the cons, and what are the advantages and disadvantages. The third piece is obviously the investment piece. Too many times, the automation, if not done correctly, the ROI can be 7+ years, 10 years. We try to advocate the ROI has to be driven in 3 to 5 years. Will that help reduce my picking errors, improve inventory visibility, enhance, increase my orders? All of those aspects need to be looked at in more detail from a metrics perspective. The fourth, once a decision has been made, what other parties need to get involved to ensure an automated warehouse works smoothly? There's a technology piece, there's possibly an ERP or a WMS or the combination of both that need to be looked at. That's usually it's probably an IT department that needs to get involved, or if that IT department or those functions outsourced, then we need to make sure we talk to the right people. The process perspective, we have to look at what are the new processes to be, because we're not operating the same way we have done so for so many over the previous years. The second is training. Who within the warehouse we will need to train and how fast we could get them up to speed. Once it goes live, we need to make sure this is not only standard operating practice, but becomes a discipline, a blueprint, and there has to be continuous improvement programs because the business does evolve, changes do happen, and customers need to ensure they have those metrics or there's the visibility around their warehouse operations to suggest, how do I make things better now that I'm operating? Can I improve a little more efficiencies here and there? Lastly, if I have multiple DCs and I implement it at one, can I repeat the same recipe into my other operations? Usually it is a journey. It's not something that gets done overnight. It is, as we had said, it is for those of us that have the privilege of having kids. It is you're growing a family, and family in this particular case, there's automation and robotics, and we have to take that into consideration. We have to nurture it. We have to take care of it. We also have to maintain it. There's a lot of moving parts, and it's just like a car. You got to change the oil and brakes from time to time. It's the same principle.
That was fantastic advice. Thank you for sharing that today. This has been a very enlightening Tecsys in Conversation interview. And thank you to our viewers. If you need support with introducing automation within your warehouse, Tecsys is here to help. At the end of this video, you have the option to speak to one of our supply chain experts or access our ebook on the ultimate guide to warehouse automation success, covering preparation, evaluation, and implementation. Thank you for watching.